gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started, okay? Good evening, everybody. Robin. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ryan Robin. Welcome y'all to our Fight Against Domestic Violence seminar. My name is Ryan Robin. I am the recording secretary of Pi Pi Lambda chapter of Pi Alpha. I'm also the head chair for the event. I'm a little nervous. While since I've been on stage and got a mic in my hand. Hit me, okay? Good? Sorry. Everybody hear me now? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so just to start off, since we are in the sanctuary, I ask Pastor Lawrence to come up and share a prayer with us.
Amen. Everyone bowing your head, please. Father, in the name of Jesus, we come to you now. We thank you for this time, this appointed time. My God, we thank you for each and every expert speaker that is here. We thank you for the hearts of your people, God, for the concern of your children, God. So, Father, we thank you now that every heart is already prepared to receive, every ear is attentive to what will be said. My God, we thank you now that someone's life is going to be changed, families will be changed, relationships will be changed, and families will be saved because of this, God. Father, we thank you now for peace in every home in the name of Jesus. And God, we thank you that you would just anoint these speakers tonight, that as they go forth, God, that they will be able to share all that's in their heart with your people. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Mic check. Thank you, Pastor Lawrence. Okay. All right, y'all, let me introduce myself again. My name is Brother Ryan Robin. I am the recording secretary for the Pi Pi Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and I am also the event chair for this event. Fight against domestic violence seminar. We started to do this. Sorry, y'all. We decided to host a Fight Against Domestic Violence seminar because domestic violence is such a prominent problem in all societies, right? If you go to the next slide. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm good. I appreciate you, brother. All right. So we came here today because domestic violence is such a prominent issue in all societies, okay? The objective of this seminar is to raise awareness about statistics and legal proceedings regarding domestic violence, as well as the resources offered to the individuals involved in domestic violence. Through presentations and a brief Q&A session, we hope everyone leaves today possessing the tools necessary to combat domestic violence. Okay? We have some. Thank you. We have some presenters here today. We have Ms. Nicolette from the coalition, Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We have some individuals from the St. Tammany Sheriff's Office. We have representatives from the 22nd District Attorney's Office, as well as Safe Harbor, to offer information regarding domestic violence so we can all arm ourselves and be prepared to combat domestic violence, as well as help those who are victims of domestic violence, okay? So, first presentation is gonna be Ms. Nicolette with the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I want y'all to give her your undivided attention and listen to what she has to say, okay? Ms. Nicolette.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Brother Ryan, for that introduction, and I thank you so much for having us here to be a part of this seminar to raise awareness in regards to domestic violence and to provide treatment and services for our survivors and our children that have been impacted by domestic violence. And my portion is going to be just domestic violence, its challenges and solutions, and how it impacts children and families. And again, my name is Nicolette Joseph, and I work for the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and we're located in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And my portion at the coalition is that of the Children's Advocacy Coordinator. And I train and provide technical assistance to our 60-member programs in regards to domestic violence and how children are especially impacted, and just help service providers provide better services and treatment for children after their experience of domestic violence. So let's see, I'm just gonna give a quick, brief introduction. We all know that domestic violence, it threatens the stability of the family, and it can impact everyone, especially our children. And individuals who live in homes where domestic violence is prevalent, unfortunately, they grow up in an environment that is usually unpredictable, filled with tension, anxiety, and usually dominated by fear. And this can lead to significant emotional and psychological trauma, not only to the parent that is a survivor or the victim of domestic violence, the children are also impacted as well too. So because of this, it is very important that we provide individuals with a safe and caring environment where they can process and heal from their traumatic experiences after their exposure to domestic violence. Next slide, please. Okay. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the coalition and what we do. The Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, we are a federally funded statewide coalition of shelters, non-residential programs, and individuals all working together to end domestic violence throughout Louisiana. We oppose violence as a means of control, and we support equality in all relationships. Our 16-member programs support and empower formerly battered individuals and children of all racial, social, ethnic, religious, economic group, ages, and lifestyles. And LCDV member programs provide services throughout the state in rural, urban, and suburban areas. Next slide, please. So our mission at LCDV is to eliminate domestic violence through public education, systems change, social change, and public policy, and also to promote and strengthen equality, comprehensive services for our programs and all individuals who, again, are affected or impacted by domestic violence. And our vision statement is that LCADV is dedicated to bringing about change to our institutions, laws, politics, attitudes, and beliefs, which will allow individuals, most importantly, to live a life free of domestic violence. Next slide, please. Okay. So our work at LCADV, it falls into 4 different categories. The first category on the screen you'll see is education. And through education, we provide training and technical assistance to domestic violence shelter staff, advocates, law enforcement, social workers, healthcare providers, prosecutors, and anyone who may come in contact with a domestic violence survivor as well as their children. And our goal with these trainings is to improve the knowledge base of the service provider in an effort to ensure that domestic violence victims are kept safe and perpetrators are held accountable for the crime that they commit. And in regards to public policy, we are a centralized legislative voice for domestic violence advocacy. And during legislative session at the state capitol in Baton Rouge, our agency is frequently working to improve our state laws regarding domestic violence abuse. And currently we are in session, and I just want to let you know that one of the bills that we are lobbying for is to increase funds for our domestic violence shelters. And these funds will ensure that survivors and that their children, that they have safe and adequate shelter to help them rebuild and empower their lives after their experience of domestic abuse. Next slide, please. Okay. And 2 other components that we do is quality assurance. And we also partner with DCFS on the quality assurance process for domestic violence programs, ensuring that each shelter is meeting the state standards and providing survivors with the highest quality of service possible. And lastly, we also work for social change and awareness, and we promote and operate a statewide domestic violence hotline along with public awareness to educate the public and about domestic violence and change the social norms about the violence that does occur. Next slide, please. And this is a list of our 16-member programs across the state that provide services to survivors as well as their children. Next slide. And here is a list of the services that our 16-member programs provide to survivors and their children. And these services are crisis hotline, 24-hour crisis hotline, emergency shelter, child advocacy, legal advocacy, outreach services, support groups for survivors as well as children, prevention program, and other services in the community that can help survivors and children after their experience of domestic violence. Next slide, please. Well, that's not what I have on mine, but let's see. I'll just really talk real briefly about domestic violence. Quick question. Is domestic violence a loss of control? True or false? True? Okay. Actually, that is not true. It's incorrect. Domestic violence is a choice. I want you to remember that. It is a choice, and it's very deliberate. And batterers use this tactic to maintain power and control over their partners. Domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, sexual assault, and battery, and other abusive behaviors, used as a part of a specific pattern of power and control perpetrated against one intimate partner against another. And I want to let you know also, too, because we think that domestic violence is just physical assault or different things of that nature. But I want you to know that psychological abuse, as well as emotional abuse, financial abuse, as well as stalking, are also different types of domestic violence. And the frequency and severity of domestic violence can vary dramatically. And I want you to know, before you leave today, that one constant component of domestic violence is power and control over another person. Next slide. There we go. State rankings. So we know that, unfortunately, domestic violence is very common in our state. And 1 in 4 women will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. And Louisiana has been known for having high incidence of domestic violence as well as domestic violence homicides throughout our state. And every year, the Violence Policy Center, and this is a national organization out of Washington, D.C., they analyze FBI data and ranks each state on the rate of which individuals are murdered by their partners. And Louisiana has consistently led the nation in this data collection, unfortunately. And currently, Louisiana, as you see on your screen, we are ranked number 5 in the nation when it comes to individuals who have been murdered by their domestic violence, by their intimate partner in that relationship. And ranking 5th is the lowest ranking that we've had in several years. Most commonly, we've been ranked 2nd or 3rd when this data collection has been gathered. So it's an improvement, and I'm thankful for the improvement, and that just shows that we've been going to the Capitol, lobbying for our survivors, lobbying for services for domestic violence survivors, that we're not number 2 like we usually are, and we're number 5. And hopefully, if we continue to advocate for survivors, eventually in years to come, we won't be on this list at all. So that's our goal, to improve services and to not be on this list of state rankings in regards to domestic violence homicide in our area. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about domestic violence and parenting, because domestic violence not only affects the parent, but it also affects the child, and it affects the parent and child relationship and how that parent rears, cares, and supports for their child. Next slide. After leaving an abusive relationship, survivors often leave, as we know, with long-lasting and sometimes permanent effects to their mental and physical health. And post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, and depression are 2 related diagnoses that affects a survivor's ability to properly parent their child. And when survivors have access to mental health resources, they can first prioritize their mental health, build a closer bond with their children, improve their parenting skills, and lastly, it can effectively help them respond to their children's needs. Because again, the survivor has been impacted by domestic violence, but the child has also been impacted by domestic violence by just witnessing it and being in the home where domestic violence has been prevalent. And later in the presentation, I will talk a little bit more about how children are impacted and affected by domestic abuse. So just a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. We know that this is a mental health condition that is triggered when an individual experiences or witnesses a terrifying event. And PTSD can impact a survivor that has experienced domestic violence in 2 important ways. It can impact the parent and child bond, and again, it can also impact the survivor's ability to respond effectively to their child's needs. Next slide, please. Also, depression, like I spoke about earlier, and this is a common mood disorder experienced after a traumatic event. And depression, it can impact the difficulty of a survivor or an individual supervising or caring for their child, they can be unresponsive to their child's trauma responses because, again, they have their own experience of abuse and they're dealing and coping with their experience of it. So there may be some difficulties with them navigating about how their child has been affected and maybe ways that their child has been acting out after their experience of domestic abuse. And they also may have no desire to participate in activities with their children. That's what depression does. You don't want to be active, you don't want to be connected, you're just in your bubble and to yourself, and this can affect the parent and child relationship as a result of this abuse. And lastly, there's no routine discipline, and that can affect the child because one thing that children need, and we all need, we need that routine discipline in any relationship, in any form of our lives. So when, Monday it may not be happening, on Tuesday it may not be happening, there's a form of unpredictability for these children, and we are working very hard to empower them and give them some form of routine back in their lives after coming up in a chaotic home life. Next slide, please. And really important, I want you to know that mental health services for both the parent and the child is an essential strategy to help families break the cycle of violence. Next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about domestic violence in children. Next slide, please. Okay. So here are a few statistics associated with children and their exposure to domestic violence. Over 15.5 million children are exposed to domestic violence every year, and 7 million children witness severe violence. Almost 40% of American children have been direct victims of 2 or more acts of violence. And a child's exposure to an act of violence increases their likelihood to their exposure for other types of violences. And this is when ACEs comes into place, and that's adverse childhood experiences. That's when a child has been impacted by trauma in their life. So the more incidents of trauma that this child has experienced, the number of ACEs increases. So this can lead to mental health issues, substance abuse issues, emotional issues, relationship issues, interacting with intimate partners, loved ones, or peers. So we know that domestic violence not only physically damages someone, but we know that through the statistics and through us doing our research that it also impacts how children navigate through life in an emotional way as well too. So now we're going to look at the next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about the ways that children experience domestic violence. And the first way that they experience domestic violence is they feel the tension building prior to the abuse. They may see the passive behavior between the abuser and the non-offending parent. They also may actually witness the abuse take place. Sometimes if they're not physically in the room when the abuse is taking place, they may overhear the sounds of abuse. Also, too, if they're in the room, it may happen when they were sleeping, maybe not at home. Whenever they wake up or whenever they come to the house, they may see the aftermath of the abuse, whether that's bruises or defensive wounds to the offender or to the non-offending parent. The house may be destroyed in a disarray. Also, police may be present, medical as well as DCFS, if it's an in-home incident, and also a missing parent or guardian. That may be due to, if the abuse was very severe, that parent may have to go to the hospital or the emergency room, or if it's very severe and the police are present, the perpetrator is then incarcerated or taken to jail. And lastly, we have some incidents, unfortunately, where children are sometimes physically abused, whether that's directly or accidentally. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit briefly about childhood trauma. Next slide. And childhood trauma is an event or series of events that are dangerous, frightening, and most of all, violent. And when children are exposed to trauma, it can have a negative impact on a child's mental health, and again, like I spoke about earlier, their emotional well-being. And some children's reaction to trauma is very brief, and they're able to recover after their experience of domestic violence. But on the other hand, unfortunately, we have those children who may experience a traumatic event and sometimes develop ongoing difficulties after they've been impacted or witnessed domestic violence. So the next slide we're going to go to is the impact of domestic violence on children. So next slide shows us that research shows that children who have been exposed to domestic violence, they are more likely than their peers to experience a wide range of difficulties. And some of these difficulties that you can see on your screen are behavioral issues, social issues, emotional problems, as well as cognitive and attitudinal issues, and also long-term problems. And on our next slide, we're going to go a little bit in depth of what these actual difficulties are. Next slide, please. So for the behavioral issues that a child may display after their experience of domestic violence, they may have behavior issues, and that's they may be aggressive because they don't have a proper way to process and navigate those feelings. So instead of speaking about what they're feeling, they act out violently or aggressively to their parent, their teacher, or other peers or people in the community. And they also may lack self-control. Some of the social issues that we see with children after their experience of domestic violence, they may have antisocial or disconnected behaviors. Because many times if you come from a small community, if you know that domestic violence is prevalent in the home, you may be ashamed and thinking, well, my friends may know, my teachers may know, they may make fun of me, so I won't be around anybody, and I'll isolate myself from my peers and my friends, and this causes them to be antisocial and disconnected because of what they've witnessed and experienced in that house where domestic violence was prevalent. Also, too, they may have emotional difficulties, and that can be depression, fear, or anxiety. And anxiety can be from just not knowing when the incident would take place. You know, one thing may happen on Monday, and then Tuesday may be calm, Wednesday may be some tension filled, and Thursday may be that act of violence. So the child and the survivor is constantly walking on eggshells, unsure of when the abuse would take place, and this can lead to anxiety in the survivor, and as we see, as well as children. Also, some attitudinal issues may take place. Some children, they sometimes justify their own experience of violence. Sometimes they may feel, well, I grew up in a home where my father was violent towards my mother, never went to jail, my mother took him back, so they don't see the consequences of this negative action, so they're thinking, well, if they do it, I can do it. So sometimes they justify their own behavior and acting out violently. And also, too, they don't have a positive way to resolve conflicts. They may have negative conflict resolution skills, like instead of talking and communicating and expressing when you're unhappy, when you're upset, when you're not in a good place, instead of them speaking about that and using their words, they use their actions in a negative way, or physically assault someone, or physically harm someone, because they lack that positive conflict resolution skills since they've witnessed this in their home. And lastly, we see many of our children, they have long-term problems. And these problems can consist of substance abuse issues as well as engage in risky behaviors. And that can be getting in their own relationship that's filled with domestic violence and passing that on. And also, too, having negative behaviors and relationships with their peers and friends. And again, thinking that this is the only way to solve a problem or a conflict, or most importantly, for me to get what I want and have that power and control, is to exert that over someone in a negative and forceful and violent way. In our next slide, another reminder that I want you to know, when we see these symptoms in our children, we have to remember that a child's bad behavior may not just be considered a bad behavior, but rather a cry for help. And we must start to look at the behavior that they're displaying at that time and experiencing through a trauma-informed lens. And trauma-informed lens is just when you see a child acting out negatively or aggressively and you're not sure what it is, instead of us asking the question, well, what's wrong with you? We have to shift that narrative to a trauma-informed lens and say, what happened to you? And that will lead us into a narrative and rapport to find out what they've experienced and what they've been through. And it may not happen your first time sitting with this child or the survivor, but once that trust is built, because you know growing up in the home where domestic violence is prevalent, trust can be broken. So we have to know to deal with our survivors and our children with delicate gloves, because they've been through a lot, you know, growing up in a home where domestic violence has been prevalent. So lastly, I just want to talk about, on the next slide, ways that we can support adults and children after their experience of domestic abuse. So the first important thing, you want to have the conversation. If you or someone that you may know is in a domestic violence relationship, you want to have that conversation with that individual in a safe and confidential location, because it may be very difficult for them to open up, and they don't want someone to overhear their abuse or what their experience or about that incident. So we have to make sure it's a quiet and safe environment in a confidential location, so they can express what they've been through and have a positive platform to speak about what they've experienced. And we also have to let the individual know that this is a judgment-free conversation and they're not alone. And a lot of times, most individuals don't want to open up because they feel that they'll be judged, ostracized about their experience, and that can lead to shame and guilt, and we don't want to do that. So if you do come in contact with someone that has been exposed to domestic violence and you're not sure what to say, on the screen I have 3 narratives that you can maybe start the conversation with to help that person open up about their experience of domestic violence. The first one is You can tell them, I know this is difficult to discuss, but please know that you can talk to me about anything. You are not alone. I care about you. I'm here for you no matter what. And lastly, you are not responsible for what's going on, because many survivors and children always think that I'm to blame. It was my fault. Maybe if I cooked the food differently, if I wore something differently, if I didn't act out at school, maybe this domestic violence incidents would not be taking place in the home. So we have to let them know that they are no way responsible for what's taking place in the home. And lastly, next slide, we're going to talk about how to communicate with adults and children after their experience of domestic abuse. First thing important, confidentiality, again, is very important. What we talk about stays in here. It doesn't go any further because we want to empower, encourage, and support individuals that have been impacted by domestic violence. So the first important thing, we have to listen without judgment. Remain calm, centered, and balanced when you're engaging and talking to a survivor or a child of domestic violence. Engage but not coerce. Don't put words in their mouth. Let them lead the conversation. Let them talk about their experience. And after they open up, then you can have some follow-up questions based on what they said and what they disclosed to you. Also, use the survivor's language. If they say certain things particular to the abuse, don't switch it for a narrative that you're comfortable with. Make sure you use that specific language, because that's that survivor's experience or that child's experience in that violent home. Also very important, be culturally specific when you speak with adults in regards to their experience of domestic violence. Next slide, please. And communicating with children is almost the same thing in regards to when we talk to adults about their experience of domestic violence. So with children, we first want to find out what they know, because we may think they may know a little bit, but in talking to them and they open up, they may share with us that it was so much more than we thought that they knew about the incident and what they were exposed to. Let them know it's okay to ask questions, because they may not be sure of what's going on or why it took place. So let them know it's a safe place. You have any questions, let me know. I'm going to answer them as best as I can. And in the event that I can't, then we'll connect to another resource that can give us better information to help that child process that incident of abuse. Also, too, if it may be difficult for the child to open up, you can use books or resources to help them feel more open to express what they feel or what they've been through. One resource that we use at the coalition and our programs also use is Hands Are Not for Hitting. So it's a literature, short read for children that they can understand, child-friendly, that they can express what they feel and what they've been through that literature, Hands Are Not for Hitting. Also, too, allow the child to use their own words and express how they feel what they experienced. Again, just like the survivor, don't put words in their mouth. Don't coerce them into what to say. Let them have the narrative about what they experienced, and then you follow up after with specific questions about the abuse or the incident if you may need that information. Also, again, reassure their safety, because growing up in a home where domestic violence was prevalent, they may feel unsafe. They may feel unsure. They may feel that it can happen at any time. If they hear a door slam, they may think the abuser's coming. Or if they hear something that identifies to a trauma response of when they were in that home, it may take them back to that place where they were in that violent incident. So we have to reassure their safety, that they're okay, and that it is okay for them to open up and share with us what they experienced. And lastly, again, through all these things, we're showing support. Let them know that you're there, that you care for them, and that you want to make sure that their emotional health and physical well-being is most important. So also, too, when it may be above your scale, or you're talking to a survivor or a child and you're like, okay, it's a little too much for me, let me contact a professional or maybe get some additional services. The next slide on the screen, we can talk about some things that if you may witness, when to call a counselor or a therapist or somebody else. So the first thing in a survivor or a child, if you notice that their behavior or their mood has drastically changed, that's when we can call professional help to help this survivor or this child. Also, significant trouble eating or sleeping, or maybe complain about physical symptoms, increased anger or aggression. Also, too, behavior is becoming more risky and less predictable, and the most important indicator that we may see when it's time for us to maybe call a counselor, a therapist, or someone else that can help in a scope that we aren't trained to. Also, if that person talks about dying or engaging in serious behaviors. So these are just some things, just in a nutshell, briefly, about domestic violence, what children go through, what adults go through, and how we can support them after their experience of domestic violence. I thank you for your time and your attention, and have a great afternoon. Thank you again.
Thank you again, Nicolette. As I'm getting myself together, Nicolette talked a lot about children being affected by domestic violence. I just want to touch on that. A lot of times people look at domestic violence situations as victim and offender, victim and offender, victim and offender. It's a lot more complex than that, and she touched on the fact that children are very much impacted by domestic violence. And I hope y'all paying attention to everything she had to say about that, okay? Next, we have some representatives from the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office. We have Miss Sergeant Kathy, I'm sorry if I butchered this. How you say it? Yavinci, Sergeant Kathy Yavinci, who has 17 years of law enforcement experience and is currently a sergeant in the Persons Crime Unit in the Criminal Investigations Division at the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office. We also have Detective Paige Bruyette. There we go. She has 15 years of experience at the 15 years of law enforcement experience and is currently a detective for the Persons Crime Unit, the same unit as Sergeant Kathy. Crime Unit, Criminal Investigations Division at the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office, okay? So between the two of them is over 30 years of experience. So I want y'all to welcome them to the floor. Ms. Kathy, Paige. Thank y'all.
Hello, everybody. I didn't fall getting up here, which is amazing because every time I do any kind of public speaking, I fall. So the fact that I didn't, I think I need a round of applause. So this is my sergeant, Kathy. She's my boss, so even if y'all don't like what I have to say, just tell her y'all did, okay? All right, so my name is Paige. I am a detective in the Persons Crimes Division. We handle a wide variety of different crimes, but we handle any kind of domestic violence follow-up call. And she's going to get into kind of what that means as far as what the investigation looks like, and I'm just going to kind of give a rundown of what domestic violence is. So next slide, please. Domestic violence is any action done to harm, scare, force an individual to do things they don't want to do. The abuser is often someone the victim intimately knows or lives with. Domestic violence does not have to be physical assault. It can be stalking, neglect, emotional, psychological, economic, or sexual. Children, family members, partners, cohabitants can all be victims of domestic violence. Intimate partner violence, child abuse, and elder abuse are different types of domestic violence. With that being said, whenever you think about domestic violence, I'm sure you get an image in your head of a female, black eye, busted lip, and you think, yes, that's domestic violence. But that's one form of it. There's all kinds. Whenever we're dealing with it at the sheriff's office, we have to wrap our heads around what is this person, as she calls them survivors. We have the habit of calling them victims. I like her word better. And what can we do to help this person feel safe and get them out of the situation that they are in? Next slide, please. Physical abuse is the most common and known forms of domestic violence. Psychological, emotional abuse is any behavior that's exploiting the victim's insecurity, vulnerability, or character. Sexual abuse is any behavior that utilizes sex to control or demean the victim. Financial abuse, verbal abuse, isolation, which is huge, and stalking. Isolation is usually how it starts. Somebody getting into a relationship and don't hang out with your friends anymore, don't see your family anymore. Just, I'm all you need, you don't need to hang out with anybody else. And it progressively gets worse, psychologically. Then it turns into physical abuse. Nobody gets into a relationship and says, oh yes, this is the man of my dreams, I'm gonna let him beat me. It never starts out like that. It starts out with isolation, goes to psychological, emotional. Then it can progressively get to physical. Next slide, please. And there's a cycle. honeymoon phase, calm, tension building, then the incident. And it just goes round and round and round. Next slide, please. The honeymoon, calm. During the honeymoon phase, the abuser may apologize, buy gifts, be extra affectionate, make up for the abuse. And the abuser believes the promises that they're going to make. They believe that they're going to change. But not all abusive relationships have a honeymoon phase, and it slowly changes to the tension building phase. Tension builds in the relationship, and the victim feels like they're walking on eggshells. And then the incident happens. It occurs when the tension finally breaks. This can play out in many different ways. Usually, this part of the cycle is when the abuser physically lashes out at the victim. The abuser may hit, rape, or attempt to rape the victim. Other cases of physical abuse can include neglect, denying the victim access to basic necessities, changing the locks on the house, cutting off access to a shared checking account. In relationships where the abuse is primarily psychological, the abuser may deny the victim access to family and friends, call the victim humiliating names, or make threats of violence. Next slide, please. As I said earlier, I know that whenever I normally think of the victim, I have the habit of thinking of female with a black eye and a busted lip. I have lots of facts here on male victims. 1 in 4 men have been physically abused by an intimate partner. Nearly 1 in 10 men in the United States have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. But I want to go back to that first one. 1 in 4 men have been physically abused by an intimate partner. So if I could just sit here and think, 1 in 4, I can think of 4 guys. That's a lot. That is a lot. That's too many. We need to do something about that. 48.8% of men have experienced at least one psychologically aggressive behavior, i.e., being kept track of by demanding to know his whereabouts, insulted or humiliated, felt threatened by partner's actions by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Who keeps track of their man? Yeah. Next slide, please. Women are 5 times more likely than men to be victimized by their spouse or partner, ex-partner, boyfriend, or girlfriend. However, women who use force or violence within the confines of an intimate partner relationship can be seen as either a victim or an aggressor. As a victim, women who use force or violence are typically resisting, reacting, or defending against abuse from a partner in the relationship. But a woman may also be the perpetrator of abuse. Women tend to initiate or use physical assault because they are motivated by a need for self-protection or justice of previous continued assaults by their partner. 71%, I believe, was the number that I had. Is that right? 71? Yeah. 71% of all females that are killed in the state of Louisiana are killed by somebody that they know, by a male that they know. Staggering number. Next slide, please. The use of violence by women may be directly correlated to the lack of knowledge or access to other resources or networks of support. Absent a viable alternative to use of force, a woman may believe that violence is her only means of self-protection. Next slide, please. Although women are domestically violent, the impact of their violence is typically less violent than men's. If a man is hurting a woman, the violence generally escalates and becomes most dangerous when the relationship ends and in subsequent years. If a woman is hurting a man, the violence usually ends when the relationship ends. So that's pretty much stating that relationship's over, the woman stops. Relationship's over, the man doesn't stop. Next slide, please. So what do we do as the sheriff's office? The man in the relationship always goes to jail. No. The one with the marks is always the victim. No. We will determine who's the predominant aggressor and assist the victim. Absolutely. The case does not stop whenever the initial deputies leave the scene. Both parties can be a victim and an aggressor. Yes. And we're going to arrest everyone. No. Next. Miss Kathy?
You're gonna give me that one. They gave me a mic that didn't work, of course. All right. And Detective Brulette only gave me one slide, which is probably good. And I would like to tell y'all that she put this whole presentation together for the sheriff's office. Unfortunately, prior to us being invited here, we didn't have anything in place for this kind of event or presentation, so I'm glad that now we do, and we're going to be more involved to actually come out and speak to y'all. So I just want to give her some props on doing this. So what happens when the popo get called? Obviously, somebody calls 911. That could be the victim, that could be the perpetrator, that could be just a witness. So the deputies arrive, they make sure that the scene is safe, checking weapons, making sure that anybody that may be injured gets help. All parties are separated. So that means the victim, the perpetrator, all the witnesses. So if you have somebody in your family that is going through this, just be aware that the police are going to separate everyone, even though right now it's very traumatic for the one person that, or multiple people that were injured. Unfortunately, we have to separate everyone just to make sure that we can get everybody's statement, and that statement can be used in the future for court to make sure that whoever caused this harm goes to jail and stays in jail. Next one is the go back, please. Determining the probable cause exists to make an arrest. So that's part of us separating everyone and getting everyone's statement, reviewing injuries, reviewing the scene, seeing that something happened. Arrest is made. The victim has the window of opportunity. That means when somebody goes to jail, now they have a period of time that the person is no longer in the home. They can pack up their things, get the kids out of there, get themselves out of there, or go to the DA's office and apply for a restraining order and make sure while the gentleman or the female or whoever got arrested gets served with a protective order and they can't come back. If no arrest is made in all domestic violence incidents that are called to the sheriff's office, we do make a report. We do document that something happened. Even if we can't put somebody in jail right then, a report will be made. And of course, follow up by a detective. You'll get a phone call. You'll have somebody stop by your house if you don't answer the phone. You get letters in the mail provided with all the information you might need to get additional assistance.
Next slide. So, while we're talking, if you notice, hey, maybe I am a domestic abuser, well, what should you do? You recognize the signs and you get help. You remove yourself from the situation. Go to therapy, go to church. Don't do drugs, don't do alcohol. You can get help. If you realize, hey, I'm doing these things and it's bad for my relationship, it's bad for my husband, it's bad for my wife, it's bad for my children, good on you for recognizing that and do something about it. Next. If you're a victim, same thing. Recognize the signs and the symptoms. Make a plan to get yourself out of that situation. Practice that plan to get out of that situation. Teach your kids how to dial 911. You would be surprised how many children like to dial and just hang up and not talk to us. Tell someone, tell anybody, tell the person that bags your groceries, tell your neighbor, tell your pastor, tell a colleague, tell me, please tell me. Use the resources that we're all going to provide you. Just use the resources. Next slide, please. If you're listening to all this and you're like, this doesn't apply to me, I have nothing to do with this, I don't even know why I came, I can promise you there is somebody in your life that needs this information, and you need to pass it on to them. And you may not realize it today, but next week you can see somebody kind of withdrawing, and you're like, maybe. What can you do? Always be reassuring to the victim. Mental manipulation is the #1 form of abuse. Person gets isolated. Don't let them become isolated. Don't become frustrated with that person. It takes the survivor average 7 times to leave an abusive situation before actually staying away for good. Offer the resources that you're hearing about today. Call the police. Offer to pay for a hotel stay if they need it. Buy them groceries. Do what you can. Don't give up on them. Next slide, please. Biggest question that we get is, why doesn't the victim just leave? It's because they know something that you don't. Victim knows that the most dangerous time to leave, dangerous time in the relationship, is whenever they leave. 70% of domestic-related homicides occur after the victim leaves due to the abuser feeling as if they have nothing left to lose. That's scary. That's extremely scary. Next slide. Break the silence. It's the only thing that we can do to make this stop, to make it get better. This is perfect. Now you go out into your communities, talk to your brothers, sisters, cousins, friends, tell them what you learned today, what you heard, and hopefully they continue passing on the information. That's the only way that this gets better. As somebody who personally has dealt with domestic violence, it's something that you don't ever get over. It is something that you will never get past, but it is something that will make you stronger. My mother-in-law was killed by her husband 2 days after Christmas. And she did all the things that she was supposed to do. She got the protection order. She documented every time that he violated that protection order, and he broke in and he killed her. But I am a very big advocate for anything domestic violence, for everybody, for all the shelters, for the DA's office, for everything that they do, for the National Coalition. I believe we need to come together as a community, and this is beautiful. So thank you all for your time. Thank you all for being here, and please break the silence.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you, Kathy. Just to touch on something that they said, I didn't share this with y'all at the beginning. I am a patrol deputy for the St. Anthony Parish Sheriff's Office. Have been so for approximately a year. I also did 5 years in the correction system, working at the jail for the St. Anthony Parish Sheriff's Office. One of the most frequent calls that we get are domestic calls, and they can speak to that as well with their experience. Also, one of the most dangerous calls that we get are domestic calls. Those are always the ones that turn violent and be led astray, you know. So it's very prevalent in this parish is the point I'm trying to make. And they also said that men, well, I want to speak to the fact that whenever I go to these calls, a lot of times I talk to the male side of the altercation, and a lot of times they refuse to call the police because they say, as soon as y'all get here, y'all gonna take me to jail. I think it's very important that the point that they made that males can also be victims too. If you don't take anything else away from this seminar, take that away, males can be victims too, okay? It's not just a female issue, it's not just a male issue, it's not just a black issue, it's not just a white issue. It's an issue that's across the board. Old people, young people, your mama and your papa deal with it, and the children in the college campus is dealing with it, okay? I want y'all to understand that as y'all receiving this information, so that way you could identify offenders, victims, a little bit easier once you broaden your horizon like that, broaden your perspective, okay? All right. I didn't touch on this at the beginning of the seminar. One of the brothers passed out flashcards. That is going to be for the Q&A session. So instead of everybody coming up to the mic and stating their question, I want you all to write your questions down on that flashcard, and we're going to collect them, and we're going to take out the ones that are kind of repeated. That way we can consolidate the time that we spend on the Q&A session. So that's what those flashcards are for, okay? Okay, moving along, we have Mr. Roy Burns from the 22nd District Attorney's Office.
Good afternoon. My name is Roy Burns, and I am the supervisor for the Domestic Violence Division. And I do want to bring a couple people up here first. Lindsay Rivenbark, who is the victim coordinator, as well as Allie Surpass, who is works with me in the division as an ADA. First off, I want to thank Brother Ryan for having us here, and I want to let you know at first, I was hesitant to do this, okay? And not for any reason except for I don't really love public speaking, okay? So I was very nervous about this, but you know, this is a good thing, and I want to be here to talk about it, okay? So I think it's a great segue to go from the Sheriff's Department to who makes the arrest, okay, to go to the DA's office and kind of tell you what we do once we get that case and we get that defendant, okay, and we get a name, okay, and that's basically the start. We get a name of somebody that was arrested for a misdemeanor or a felony case, okay? So, next slide, please. Okay, and so one of the biggest things with domestic violence that's happened in the last decade, okay, is called Gwen's Law, okay, and that's probably the biggest thing that's happened in domestic violence when it comes to a DA and prosecution and arrest of domestic violence offenders. And it's called Gwen's Law because a lady by the name of Gwen, okay, was murdered, okay, by her significant other, and it really changed the way, okay, that we prosecute and hold offenders accountable, okay? And so I think there might be a button on here that allows us to play a small little blip of that, that case dealing with Gwen. And if it doesn't play, that's all right, I'll tell you what happened, okay? And so Gwen, she was a lady who was in a relationship with an abusive man, and he was arrested, okay, for something dealing with her, and he was basically let out of jail with nothing, no restrictions or anything like that, and he got out of jail, okay, and he was hot-blooded, and he went and killed Gwen, okay? And so basically, Gwen's Law came into place, and basically it started off with, if you are arrested for a felony domestic case, okay, there shall be a Gwen's Law hearing, meaning you don't go in front of a commissioner, you go in front of a district judge, okay, And that judge looks at the person's criminal history, a judicial risk assessment form, okay, and looks at that and says, how high of a bond, okay, conditions, protective order, does this person need a GPS, okay, or don't let them out at all, okay? And it flat out, I'll tell you right now, saves lives, okay? Because in that 5-day period where they're sitting in jail, they find the first 2 days they are hot, they're mad, okay? And I promise you, if they got out, they would kill these people, okay? And so this gives us time to get the things in order so that a victim can get away, okay? If they need to get out of the state, they can go, okay? So basically, this is the bail hearing, and I'm not gonna read it, okay? But basically, it allows us to do things, like I said, GPS in the very extreme cases, okay? Protective orders, okay? And I'll say this, protective orders are great, okay? But they are just a piece of paper, okay? And we get victims that tell us that all the time, and you know what, I can't tell them anything different. I say, yes, that's true. But also tell them they need to be prepared and vigilant, okay? And lean on us to help them anytime we can, okay? So this is talking about protective orders, and basically a protective order is a piece of paper, and they have to be served with that protective order personally for it to mean anything, okay? And basically what it says is you can't go near them, you can't call them, you can't text them, you can't have a third party, their mom, their dad, no contact with their person, okay? And if they do, the grounds are we're gonna hit you with a new charge. The sheriff's office is gonna arrest you for a violation of protective order, okay? They're gonna put you back in jail, okay? And a lot of times, the district attorney's office is gonna file a motion to revoke that bond on that original case because they're violating it, okay? So, I wanna go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this talks about Gwen's Law, the hearing, we talked about that, okay? But then our office takes over, and Lindsay Rivenbark, okay, she's the victim coordinator, immediately she's gonna draft protective orders, but she's also gonna reach out to that victim right away, okay? Because the big thing in prosecuting domestic violence cases is keeping constant contact with that victim, okay? Because if you don't, that offender is gonna gain back his control, okay? And he's trying to do this the entire time to pressure them, okay? But you need to keep that contact with that person, okay? Now, that protective order is gonna go to the clerk of court, okay? And they're gonna get the sheriff's deputies to go serve them, and that protective order is gonna be in the LPOR, okay? And law enforcement knows that as when they arrest somebody or somebody calls, they're gonna look it up in their system, okay? And they've got access to it, and they're gonna say, you know what, he does have a protective order against him, he violated, and they're gonna make their arrest typically, okay? Now, protective order shall be issued, okay? Basically, if a case is dealing with a felony domestic case, the court is going to issue that protective order unless I have a victim that comes in and says, I don't want it, okay? And I'll be honest with you, 50% of my cases, I'm gonna have a victim telling me, I don't want anything to stop me from contacting that person, okay? And you might think, well, that's weird, but it's not, okay? It's just what they said. This is all control, okay? So that defendant is telling them, don't show up to that hearing. Mr. Burns called you, ignore that call. Lindsay called you, ignore that call, okay? And they do that constantly, but you gotta break that chain, okay? The judge determines the bond. Right now, we have 10 criminal judges, okay? And they all hear the Gwen's Law hearings at times, but right now we've actually moved to Commissioner Dan Foyle, who acts as the sitting judge and hears these now, okay? Again, we talked about the protective order and how the victim really is the captain when it comes to having a protective order or not, okay? Because I'm not gonna stand there and put a protective order on a victim if she clearly doesn't want it, okay? It just doesn't make her life any easier, okay? Next. So this is a copy of a protective order. if we're doing a criminal protective order, and I want to make it clear, there's a criminal protective order and a civil protective order. At the DA's office, at Gwynn's Law, we're dealing with a criminal protective order. And one of the big changes now is where that star is, talks about the expiration date, okay? And as long as there's a criminal case going on, that protective order is in place, okay? As soon as that case is done with, though, that protective order goes away, and if you want another one, it needs to be part of the sentencing order, okay? Next slide, please. And we just talked about that, so that's exactly what I just went over. Next slide, please. Okay, another way, protective orders, violations don't have to be just a protective order, okay? When a person is arrested for a domestic violence, the commissioner, okay, on a misdemeanor or a felony, may put on the bond paperwork no contact with the victim, okay? And according to the laws, just a no contact on a bond order, if they contact that person, that's enough where I can charge them with violation of protective order, okay? And that goes with no contact orders, that goes with temporary restraining orders. All those things apply, and even civil injunctions in custody cases, okay? If they violate those, that is a violation of protective order in a criminal case that we will get. Next slide, please. And I'm going to speak on this very briefly. One of the major conditions that we can put on offenders are GPS monitoring devices, okay? And which also includes a fob for the victim to let that victim know where that offender is. And I promise you, that is a great thing for the victim to know that she can know exactly where that defendant is at all times, okay? And so we deal with companies, and it's very expensive. But one of the great things is the judges, they don't require the victim to pay this. They require the defendant, okay? And if he wants to get out of jail, he's got to pay the cost and fees that go along with that GPS monitoring device, okay? And these are some of the companies that we deal with. And one of the great things is if there is a violation, they will report to us, okay? And then we can report that to the judge, and if I need to file a motion to revoke bond, I will do that. So one of the main things with, and I think the other groups talked about this, but what are the main things that you always see in domestic violence cases, okay? And so one of them is substance abuse, okay? So we can look at that judicial risk assessment form, and they will mark off substance abuse, and we can have the court order them to go do an evaluation, okay? Another thing is mental health, okay? There are so many people all over that have mental health issues, okay? And a lot of that causes them to act out, and we need to address that, and if we see it, we're gonna have them evaluated, okay? And another thing, Duluth Anger Management, okay? That's a 26-week anger management program, and it's a great thing, okay? However, I don't think it works for everybody, okay? And I'll say this, I think one of the main causes of domestic violence is narcissistic people, okay? And they don't care about doing a class, okay? But they also hate it, okay? And it's punishment towards them, okay? And it's terrible, but as long as you have narcissistic, and they're typically the men in the relationship, I hate to say it, okay? You're going to have domestic violence, okay? Next slide, please. Evidence-based prosecution. So we get a case, and I'll start with what I do. I handle all the misdemeanor domestic violence trials, okay? And we talked about control, okay? So I have a trial date, I get my subpoenas out there, and guess what? The victim doesn't show up, okay? And so in the past, before Mr. Montgomery took office, there was basically this idea that if you had a domestic violence case, you'd show up to court a couple times, the victim wouldn't be there, and the state would end up null prosing the case, dismissing the case, because the victim wasn't there, okay? And was it easy? Yes, it was easy. You got out of there, you didn't have any trials, but at the end of the day, did we do any kind of service for this community, okay, in holding people accountable? And we didn't, okay? And so when Mr. Montgomery came to office, he revamped the domestic violence division, okay, and basically told me, we're going to prosecute cases victimless at times, okay? And how do you do that? You can't do it every time, okay? There's some cases that I can't prosecute victimless, okay? But there are other cases that you can. And you do things by getting in excited utterances, okay? The victim's not required to be there for an excited utterance, okay? We also use things like jail calls. We use 911 calls, okay? And so I want to make it clear that we're not giving up on cases, okay? And we're going to try to find victims and go to their houses, because we understand that if we don't do it, something bad is going to happen, okay? And I want y'all to hold the DA's office accountable when it comes to prosecute these cases, okay? But I also want to hold y'all accountable when y'all see your daughter, your son, your mother being abused. I want y'all to speak out and to encourage them to come forward, okay? Because this is what I get. I get a person arrested for domestic violence, and I get calls about how good that person is, and people saying the victim's crazy, they have this, they drink, and I get tired of hearing that, okay? So because I know it's not true. I know the facts of the case, but I want y'all to be out there and tell me when it's happening and say, Mr. Burns, it's happening, and we're gonna encourage that person to go forward with the charges. Next slide, please. So basically, this is a typical case for a Gwynn's Law, okay? And that's an affidavit of probable cause, a judicial risk assessment form, and a statement, okay, from the victim, okay? And this is a case, the offender was a career criminal and flat out a scary guy, okay? A huge criminal history, and he was backing up time. He was on parole, okay? And the victim did not want to show up to court and never showed up to court. But we prosecuted this defendant, and we used statements, excited utterances, and jail calls to ultimately convict this defendant and keep him in jail, okay? And I just want to say, this defendant was so bad that he was on parole for a manslaughter, okay? And we kept him in jail, and I'm sure he's not very happy with us, but we did. Next slide, please. Now that may be it, okay? And again, I want to say thank y'all so much, and I want y'all to know that call our office, okay? If y'all see it, call and say, you know what, Mr. Burns, I saw you speak at the church, and I need some help with something, I need to report something, and I want y'all to do that. Hold us accountable for doing our job, but I want to hold y'all accountable, okay, to help us do our job and keep offenders in jail and keep our children, our mothers, our husbands, whatever, keep them safe. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, I'll take that one. Thank you. Okay, we'll figure it out. Thank you, Mr. Burns. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost wrapping up. If you all filled out a question on your flashcard, please pass it to the end so the brothers can collect them. They're going to bring them up here, and we're going to consolidate it, and I'm going to ask the questions to the panel, okay? So just pass them to the end. Thank you again, Mr. Burns, and just kind of touch on what Mr. Burns was talking about as far as the Gwynn's Law. Like I said, with my experience in law enforcement, I know how beneficial the Gwynn's Law passing is, this because it gives us, gives the victim that window to take care of their business, move out, gain a protection order, do what they have to do. So that's very important, and I appreciate you sharing that, Mr. Burns. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our last presenters are going to be some representatives from Safe Harbor. We have Ms. Lori Brignac. She has 9 years of experience working with Safe Harbor and is currently the housing director and legal advocate for Safe Harbor. And we also have Ms. Tina Cuevas. She has 2 years working with Safe Harbor and 20 years of law enforcement experience, and she's also a legal advocate for Safe Harbor. So if y'all don't mind, welcome them to the floor.
Thank y'all so much for being here with us tonight. We're here today to tell you what Safe Harbor is and what we do. First of all, we are a nonprofit, federally recognized domestic violence program for St. Tammany and Washington Parish, and all of our services are free. We are members of the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and we have 15 sister programs in Louisiana, and most of them do serve other parishes like we do. Of course, parishes do not exclude the services that we usually refer survivors to. We send them to their area for a lot of reasons. They have court there, they have to file paperwork there, they have their life there, their jobs and whatnot, so it makes it a lot easier for them if we refer them to their own parish. We operate off of generous donations from our community partners. We fundraise, we have state and federal grants, and again, all of our services are free. We serve any domestic violence victims or survivors, as we call them, and their minor children, regardless of their age, sex, religion, national origin, sexual origin, whether they be veterans or they have a disability. We serve everybody. We have services available that are residential and non-residential, and some of our services are emergency shelter. In immediate danger, if they're in an immediate danger, we can put them in emergency shelter, and it is first come, first serve. If we're unable to provide a shelter, we find the closest shelter to them and assist them in getting into a safe place. If need be, and they need to go to a family that lives out of state, we can provide a bus or plane ticket. On the basis of what they tell us. You want to take up from here? No, okay. Okay.
You're doing
okay.
She says, I don't like to speak publicly, but I got this.
Okay. So we have advocates that assist survivors in getting any kind of documentation that they may have left behind, because a lot of them leave and they just leave everything, clothing, documentation, everything. So we help them get their documentation, we help them get protective orders, and that would be a civil protective order, and of course the DA's office will do the criminal protective order.
Yeah, that is a little different process with the civil protective order. You know, a lot of times we will call on the DA's office. We all work kind of closely together. Ms. Nicolette and I did a teen dating violence presentation at one of the high schools not long ago, and I've worked with Kathy several times over the years, and of course the DA's office. We're a regular pain in their backside because we do advocate for our survivors in their cases as they go to court. But with the criminal one, if we're having a hard time with the civil one, or a lot of times these abusers erase photos off the phones, or for evidence. They get rid of evidence that they could use to obtain a protective order. And so, but if there's been an arrest made, like Roy was saying, especially if there's a cause for a criminal protective order, we can advocate on their behalf and call up to the DA's office and say, hey, we're working with this person, that case is coming down, he's in jail, how can we see about getting a criminal protective order? And so we work together on that end too, and then we will try to move forward from there and help them apply for a civil protective order, which addresses custody and usage of the home, usage of the car, and things like that, so they have a place to go back to or a place to stay once he gets out of jail.
Okay, and back to the emergency shelter, when we take someone into shelter, it's a 45-day program. And then that's the time when we help them with the documentation and the protective orders. We have some educational classes and some safety planning. We help them get counseling if need be, drug rehab, but whatever they need, whatever needs they have, we try to assist them. And after 45 days, we will assist the survivor in either a housing program or another shelter or get into a family member.
So we do have a housing program. We have a rapid rehousing program and a transitional housing program. We fall under North Lake Homeless Coalition, the umbrella, which is the coalition for the parish in the state for St. Tammany Parish. And they also have many other organizations in the parish that have housing programs of their own. They receive funding for those. Ours only serve those that are victims that are fleeing domestic violence, whereas some of the other programs in the parish help those that are, homeless for many different reasons, not just domestic violence. Our funding for our housing program are just for those that are victims and are actively fleeing domestic violence. So kind of want to make that clear too. There's a difference when there's not the need or our program is full and we are not able to place them into our housing program, we will refer them to North Lake Homeless Coalition, then they refer them to the other programs in the community that can help them with housing assistance too. It's just not quite as long-term as our housing program assistance is, if that makes sense.
Some of our other programs is a legal advocacy. We are not attorneys. We are legal advocates. We don't investigate, nor do we offer legal advice or representation. We advocate to help the victims navigate through the process that follows the reported incident, all the way to prosecution. And again, we do work with the DA's office and law enforcement quite often. We assist in getting protective orders and accompany them to court. We advocate on the survivor's behalf to law enforcement and the DA's office and any other legal thing that they might have. We are kind of like a liaison for them. We do have a hotline. Our shelter is open 24/7. There'll be somebody there to answer the phone, to provide the crisis call and safety planning and questions, and just to listen if they just need somebody to listen. Most of them just want to be heard because they've been silenced for so long.
Which I kind of like to go back to the statistics, which those are, yes, all real and very true. But if you also, there's one statistic that I did not hear mentioned, and that's the fact that, and this was actually from a couple of years ago, I haven't looked at it recently, but just as of a couple of years ago, the average, and when I say woman, it could be a man, either a man or woman, and we do serve men and women, by the way. We have 3 different support groups going right now, and empowerment groups, and we have men that do attend, that have been victims of domestic violence, and they do attend our support groups as well. But I wanted to go back to the fact that the average woman or the average victim is assaulted 30 times before they ever call law enforcement the first time. And then if you think about that, and then you think about the numbers that we saw up on the screen, so you can't account for the women that never call. You can't account for the numbers that you don't have. So if it's 1 in 6 and 1 in 9, and we say 1 in 4 for this figure and 1 in 5 for this figure, there's so many that don't ever call at all. So it's probably even much higher than what's reported, than what the actual stats show. So that's kind of some food for thought as well too. It's actually more prevalent than the horrifying numbers that we see. It's actually even worse than that in reality when you think about it. Yeah. So just kind of wanted to throw that little fact in there too.
Well, like she said, we have 3 groups going right now. The first one is the Domestic Violence 101, just to kind of get them acclimated to the program. And we also have an empowerment group. And then we just started a trauma-informed group, and it also teaches them a little bit about their financial states and how to improve that.
And I don't know when or how we're going to find the hours in the day or the time, but it really is important to me. Something that at some point, so don't hold me accountable to it just in the right near future, but I really want to get something going for the youth in the community, for some teen dating violence, for some sort of place to gather and hold something, even if it's just a couple of times a year, where we can get the kids, the teenagers together, because the younger, the sooner you can start with the education on that end, the better off you're going to be at trying to make some headway with this cycle of abuse, you know, because it's learned so often at home. It's learned that is the correct way to handle their emotions, or, you know, they grow up in it. They either grow up most of the time being a victim or being an abuser. That's just a fact. When that's all they witness growing up, long term, that's what's learned. And so we can counteract that by providing some education. We have an awesome teen dating violence program and an educational seminar that we do. It doesn't take very long, but it really hits home, gets those facts in there, and really kind of gets those warning signs and those tips out there for these young people to look for when they're starting to date and they're just starting to interact with each other in that manner, in that setting. And I think that's super important to try to do too as well in the future.
And it's important for you to know that during our group, if the lady or man has children and no one to watch them, we do have a child advocate that's available for the groups, and there is some group activity for the children in a way that they would understand depending on the age group that she has. The child advocate also helps the children in transition with the schools, helps them apply for child care assistance if need be. If the parent has a court date or a job application or interview or doctor's appointments and she's available, she will assist them with watching the children. One of the other things we have is referrals. Of course, we make referrals all over this community because our community is full of valuable resources that these survivors desperately need, because we can't do it alone. Some of them, to name a few, and excuse me if I miss some: Southeast Legal, Workforce, NAMI's, Volunteers of America, North Lake Homeless Coalition, Community Action, STRAP, Red Cross, the Pregnancy Center, churches, Caring Center, and Catholic Charities, to name a few. And they all help us. We talk to them on a daily basis, and they assist us in anything that we might need. Did you miss anything?
I think you probably, as far as what we do,
Outreach.
you know, as far as just kind of going over what all that we do, group.
We have outreach also, and that's kind of what we're doing here.
Right.
The more we get out and talk about what we do, the more people will recognize what we do and help survivors get to us. A lot of people don't know about Safe Harbor. Even some of the deputies that's come to the shelter said, well, I didn't even know this place existed. So, you know, let everybody know we're here. We're the only domestic violence shelter in St. Tammany Parish. So, you know, our number is 985-626-5740. And I do have some flyers in the front if you want to pick one up and take a look at it, and maybe take a couple extra for those people that might need that.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Some brochures out front. Questions?
Thank you, ladies. They're doing real great work at Safe Harbor. Those two ladies specifically, I work pretty close with from time to time, and y'all are doing a great job.
I should have mentioned, he is awesome. He's come to take reports many times at the shelter, because that's another thing that we do. We will help them file reports, whether it's a violation or it's a first-time report, whether they are just someone that they have not come into contact with law enforcement yet, or someone law enforcement has referred to us, and, you know, we're working with them. And we don't just work with people that are in shelter. We serve many people that that are non-residential, or non-residential services. Since we can only shelter so many people, there's many times that we're filing reports for those that aren't staying with us, but we are providing all of our other services to them. And he's come on many calls, and he's awesome with the victims/survivors at the time on the call. very patient, very understanding, empathetic, professional, awesome.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause for our presenters. Y'all did a great job. Thank y'all. I got you. Hold on to it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move into the question and answer portion of the night. We collected some flashcards that y'all filled out in the crowd. I'm going to ask the question. Some of them are geared towards specific panelists, and some of them y'all could just step up and say who y'all want, say what you have to say about it if you have the answer to the question. There's at least one question for each panelist. I'm going to stand out the way in case somebody wants the podium. All right. The first question is, can the restraining order be served while the aggressor is detained or confined? How long does it take to get a protection order? I know a lot of these questions may have been answered within you guys' presentation, but it was a lot of information to take in, so if you don't mind reiterating. This seems like it's geared more towards...
I'll take it, yeah. So let's say at a Gwen's Law protective order, that person, the defendant's going to be there, okay, and the judge will ask him if he wants to sign it or not, okay, and it doesn't really matter if he signs it or not, okay. He can sign it, but sometimes they don't, okay. He'll get sent back to the jail, okay. A sheriff deputy will serve them while they're in jail, and that's it. They're served, okay. So very, very simple, yes. They will be served in jail.
And as far as a protective order,
Or civil protective order.
civil protective order, if they come to Safe Harbor, we will sit down with them and help them, assist them with the protective order, which usually takes, I don't know, about 2 hours. There's a lot of information to put on it. There's a lot of information to discuss. And they do have to write a statement to the effect of what happened, because that's very important.
And if we can get them back to the courthouse before 3 p.m. in the afternoon, then usually a judge or hearing officer will look at it and sign off on it, say yes or no to the TRO, the temporary restraining order at first. And if, like I said, if they have enough time to serve them that afternoon, then it's sent to the sheriff's department. There's been many a times I've driven them from the courthouse to the sheriff's department out on Brown Switch and met up with a deputy so it could be handed out that evening or as soon as possible. Every once in a while, if you catch it just right, it's a holiday or a Friday, late on a Friday afternoon or whatever, it might be Monday before it's actually signed off on and issued, and then it's usually served unless the perpetrator is dodging service. It's usually served pretty quickly, unless he's dodging, and then they just keep trying until they eventually get a hold of him. If he's in jail, been arrested, then we will let them know. We put that on the protective order, and he's then served in jail immediately once the judge signs off on it.
And Safe Harbor advocates will, myself and Lori, will go with them to the courthouse if need be. Some of them just don't want to be alone, and especially when they meet with law enforcement and do interviews with law enforcement, we go with them also. So, you know, they're not alone.
One final thing I'll say in regards to protective orders. The big reason, okay, when a person gets served, it's such a big deal is there is a protective order against you at that point, and you lose your gun rights typically, okay? And that is a huge consequence to people when they lose their gun rights, okay? But it's also a great thing to help prevent any kind of future violence against that victim.
So I have a question for you, actually, and we work together all the time on all this. So with the criminal one, they lose their gun rights immediately, because I know with the civil, with the TRO, they do not. They have to wait until they go for the hearing, and then if the protective order, the civil PO is granted, then they lose their guns then. But with the criminal,
correct. They lose it immediately,
okay,
and the judge is going to put on the record, no guns.
No guns, okay.
And I want to say something else about the protective order. When we do a civil protective order, it's important for, if you're giving somebody advice or helping them to go and file a protective order, for them to document what happened and to take photographs, because photographs are very important when it comes to a protective order.
Yes, we usually end up retaking them, because a lot of times the victims think that because law enforcement took the photos that they don't need to take any more photos. But those are then sent to the DA's office, and those are evidence, and for a protective order hearing, they need their own set of photos. Usually when we take photographs, we develop at least 3 sets. One for an extra set for the victim to hold on to, one to give to the DA's office just, for the just in case, and then one for the protective order hearing a couple of weeks after the TRO is issued. Because it's much easier to get a civil protective order. Well, you basically have to have some photo evidence or an eyewitness to testify for it to be for a civil protective order to be granted.
All right. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Mr. Burns. All right. What, can I say one thing before you speak, ma'am? I do have to mention that our seminar is being streamed on YouTube. So if you choose to speak on the mic, or if you come to the point where you have to speak on the mic, it is being streamed on YouTube, and it will go out and it will be broadcasted. I'm sorry? Oh. Okay. Actually, I'm gonna use this opportunity to ask Mr. Pastor Lawrence to come up and speak on that, just because I should cover that at the beginning, but for obvious reasons I didn't. So, Pastor Lawrence, if you don't mind.
Once again, thank you all. Y'all gave a wealth of information. Thank you. The reason why we streamed it was because we fully understand that everybody could not be here, not only because of work, but there's some people because of power and control could not be here. But by us streaming it now, they will be able at work or away from their environment in a safe place where they can go and get all of the information that was given out tonight. So just let them know to go to the church's YouTube channel, and it will stay up there. We're going to keep it up there always. So if there's any victim, any family member, friend, anybody you know, they can just go to the YouTube channel and they can get everything that was taught in here to us tonight in a safe place where they can do it. Amen? The other thing is, if you do have a question and you come up, we are not filming the people who are asking the questions. We will not put that on film if you want to come up and you're comfortable to ask a question.
All right, ma'am, you go ahead and ask your question.
I'll take that one. I'll be honest with you. I think domestic violence, as long as there are human beings on this planet, is most likely always going to exist, okay? And it's terrible, okay? But we can limit it as much as we can, okay? And I do want to say there are so many cases of domestic violence with murders and then a murder-suicide, okay, where that victim didn't want a protective order, okay, and they still get killed, okay? They have a protective order, they get killed. The best thing we can do is to start at an early age when we're raising our children and letting them know this is not how you respond, and you don't show that to them in the household, okay? I promise you, I believe that is the best way. If they see it at home, okay, they're gonna do it in the future. And I think it starts with families first.
You could also call Safe Harbor and we can get you in a safe place.
In a safe place, and there's lots of other things. You know, I've changed or purchased locks and then arranged for locks to be changed on houses. You know, we have some different funding, different streams of funding. It's not always available all the time, so it is, you know, kind of just depends on where we are in the grant year with funding, but we assist with all kinds of safety precautions and things that people can do to try to help make their home safer. You know, letting neighbors know that what's going on. If you see his vehicle, if you see it at the beginning, at the front of the subdivision, please call 911 and then call me and let me know. Like, you know, the more people that know that, to let other people kind of be your eyes and ears as well too. I mean, I don't know in that particular case, you know, what could or could have been done or not done, but, and it's sad, it's terrible, it's horrible.
Yes, I have another concern. On what basis would a judge reject or deny a
Well, I mean, just just kind of like with any kid, they want to see proof. Of course, the abuser's going to lie and say, I've never laid a hand on her. I've never touched her. She's crazy. She's this. She's that. She's just trying to take my children. She's just trying to get custody, this or that. He's not going to walk into the courtroom 95% of the time and say, yes, I did that. Please give me the protective order. So, any documentation or photos of injuries, witnesses, people that will testify on your behalf, what they've heard or seen abuse take place is always a plus. But it's like when you're trying a case, you have to have proof. You have to meet a burden of proof to get something granted.
I mean, I'll give you an example. So and use it as from me prosecuting a DV case, which is basically like it's a trial, but a protective order hearing is a mini trial as well. Okay, mm-hmm. So I had a man who was arrested for domestic violence, dealing with a ex-wife, and based on the police report, I was like, I think I've got him, okay? I think he's guilty. I think I can have enough here to prosecute, okay? Well, I don't know everything, don't claim to. He provided, through his attorney, a video that showed the opposite, okay? And it never went to trial because once I saw that, I knew that one side wasn't credible, okay? So videos help, audios, recordings, those things, and I'll say they're rare, okay? I'd say most cases where I get of an allegation of domestic violence, I would say most cases it happened, okay? But there are those crazy cases where, the person is totally making it up.
And if the hearing officer finds that it is frivolous, then of course he will deny it and they will pay the court cost.
Thank you. Moving right along, ladies and gentlemen. We have a question for Nicolette. Are there costs associated with a restraining order, and where can they be filed at?
Is there a cost? From what I understand, y'all can help me with that question. There shouldn't be a cost, right? Mm-hmm. You can go to your local courthouse. Is that correct?
Yeah.
If it's granted,
if it's granted,
it's not.
If it's granted, if it's not, if it's dismissed. So the way the law reads is that the victim is not ever supposed to be charged for filing for a protective order, an order of protection, unless the judge deems the filing frivolous. And so, to my knowledge, that would have to be probably read onto the record that it is found to be frivolous in order for court costs to be cast. So they are not supposed to be cast.
And the criminal one, no cost.
Thank you. Our next question is, what is the collateral effect of domestic violence impact on our community?
Oh, wow, we could go on about that for hours, I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, that is a loaded question, but if y'all want to touch on it,
feel free.
It's
huge. Everything from, someone losing life lost to, the children being affected, it's perpetuated just further and further. It's a cycle that never ends, That's a huge question.
So I told y'all my personal story, and I can just give you a kind of rundown. It happened in 2014 when my mother-in-law was killed, and my children were wee little ones at the time. And I can tell you now that they are older teenagers, they are now dealing with the post-traumatic stress that she was talking about. They're dealing with the depression that she was talking about, and they're navigating their way into adulthood, having dealt with everything that she said. So they're having the fallout from domestic violence is exactly the post-traumatic stress, the depression, which our children are dealing with already because of COVID, because of the hurricanes, because of social media, everything. They're already dealing with that. So add the stress of domestic violence. It's just a snowball effect.
And also something very important too, just like she said, I want to reiterate, many people think that when children are exposed at a young age, that as soon as it happens, you'll see the effects and the ramifications in their behavior as soon as it happens. But it's not a time clock or a time limit when you'll see that behavior displayed after they've been impacted or experienced it. You may see it later on when they're teenagers. And also too, developmentally, you may think little ones, ages 0 to 2, oh, they won't have any ramifications or any incidents after it, but you may see regressive behaviors as far as bedwetting, thumb sucking, also with our middle school children, maybe frequent nightmares, also problems at school, because if you have a child that's growing up in a home where domestic violence is prevalent, they don't have time to worry about their school or their studies, so their academics and their school performance may suffer as a result of that. So a lot of times we see the collateral damage, like she said, from the children, not after the incident has immediately happened, but later on down in the future when they may have a trauma trigger or something that identifies with that incident that brings them back, and a parent may think, well, you know, my child hasn't talked about it or brought it up to me, so they must be okay. But when they see those identifying behaviors, when they start to act out or regress or maybe become defiant, those are the times when we open up and we talk to our children. Well, hey, I know this may have happened years ago, but tell me more about what you felt when you saw that. How were you impacted by it? And what can we do to help you moving forward? Because we want to make sure that our children, like we were saying earlier, don't display these behaviors in their intimate relationships or with their peers to continue this cycle of abuse like they talked about earlier, to keep this going on and on and on. And we also have to be careful with our children in regards to intergenerational trauma, because what they see in that home, they may grow up and may not have any incident of abuse or be an abuser or a victim of domestic violence, but we have some cases where they see this behavior, it's a learned behavior, and it's adopted in their home and their family and their relationships as well too. So it's impacted across the board, whether it's, you know, the children, aunts, uncles, anybody that's closely related or affected by that incident, they may be impacted because they themselves may have an incident of abuse that they never spoke about, and seeing this happen to their loved one or a family member may bring up those feelings of their abuse that took place, and they just never talked about it or opened up. So that's why we encourage everyone, services, counseling, therapy, also your church community, close friends, anybody that you can lean on that support, so we don't eventually see those residuals of domestic violence and domestic abuse in our community as well too.
And I would think the financial impact too. You know, nobody wants to go to work with a bruise, a black eye, so they call in sick, or they miss work, or maybe they lose their job because they're missing so much work, or they have court date after court date after court date between custody or the criminal side and the civil side, because you know, when there's a criminal case and there's children involved, then there's the whole civil side and the civil court system and custody issues, and so you're in and out of court, and these abusers tend to have the money, they tend to take control over the bank accounts and have the job, you know, be the one earning the larger wage. If she's even allowed to work at all, you know, she might not be able to maintain that job. You can only keep up with so much, you know, at one time when you've left, and all the stress of leaving and that danger time, and you've got nowhere to go and nowhere to be, and it's kind of up in the air. Am I going to have a house for me and the kids? Is he going to have to help with any kind of child support? That's going to take months to start coming in, if at all. It's just a lot financially. So just the financial impact on the community is huge too.
And I want to mention too, some of the survivors either lose their car, or the car was taken, or
it's in his name
they
only.
Can't afford the gas. We do have Uber services, and sometimes Laura and I take them anywhere they need to go. So we get them where they need to go, whether it be a court, a doctor's office, or a lawyer's office, or whatever. So, you know, that's one of the things that keeps people from coming and reaching out for help, because they don't have a way. I mean, if they want to come to Safe Harbor, and we can do, well, they can call Safe Harbor, and we'll Uber them there if we have to. We'll do anything we have to do to help them and assist them in any way.
Thank you. Our last question. It seems like it's geared towards the sheriff's office, but I'll let all you touch on it if you feel the need to. How, as a community, in conjunction with law enforcement, can we take a proactive approach to change the culture of our community from domestic violence?
Say something.
Yeah, the words local mics.
Right, does this work? Okay. Say something. I mean, don't think that, you know, if you are being a victim or you are being abused at your house or by your spouse or by your dating partner, your 2-year-old sees this, okay? Don't wait to say, you know, maybe I can leave him when he's a little older, or children see everything, they hear everything. They know that there's abuse going on in the house, and then they go to school, and now they're abusing the little girl, little boy in their class, and the teachers don't know why. We have to start talking to each other. You know, if your daughter or son or your friend wants to tell you about something that happened, most of the time they just want you to listen. And then once you listen, then maybe offer some assistance, you know, tell them about Safe Harbor, tell them to call the sheriff's office. We have to say something.
And I think we also need to start becoming more comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations. It may be something that you don't want to talk to your loved one about, or maybe your children about, but that conversation, as uncomfortable as it might be, might save a life in the future and educate them and raise awareness in regards to domestic abuse, the warning signs and symptoms, and how they're impacted by it as well.
And I think getting a lot of the community, a lot of the systems, in the systems in place, whether it be law enforcement, the civil side of the court, the criminal side of the court, us, you know, other powers that be or entities on the same page, because it's really, you know, to say, well, why doesn't she just leave, or you need to leave, you need to get out of this. The barriers are stacked so high, just beside the fact that he's told her, I'll kill you if you tell a soul. I'll kill your parents and their dog too. I mean, literally, the threats that are made against them. So the sheer fear that's there. Also, you know, when you leave, if you leave and you've got children, you know that he's going to have them at least every other weekend. If not, nowadays, the courts, you know, it's more 50-50. And so what happens when you're not there to get between him and the children when he starts attacking them? And because if he's not already being abusive to the children, when you leave and the children are there left with him, he's got to have somebody to take that anger and frustration out on, and so it does normally turn to the children. So that's another huge barrier. I mean, if you know, as a parent, as a mom or as a father, if you know, are you gonna say, well, I'm gonna do what's best for me and I'm gonna leave and get out of this, knowing that you're leaving your kids in their care 50% of the time, and that they stand a huge possibility of suffering the same abuse. So that's a huge barrier, and that's something that only working together in the system, in the courts, and you know, with law enforcement, can stand up and put a stop to that and say, you know, why is this occurring?
Yeah, I've had them say, you know, well, I stayed because I knew my children would be abused if I left.
I have to protect
and they
them.
put their self aside, and they're worried about protecting their children.
Or they can't feed them. They simply can't feed them. They can't keep a roof over their head. Their name, you know, everything is in his name. The home's in his name. The car's in his name. The bank accounts are all in his name. And he said, you know, if you leave, you get nothing. You get not a dime. And I'll quit my job, and I will not work before I'll pay you a dime of child support. Happens every day, all the time. And so with these barriers that are stacked up, you know, against them, it's definitely not as cut and dried or as simple as, why won't she just leave? Why won't she just testify against this guy? Why won't she just, you know, stand up for her? It's not always about that. A lot of times she's being the protector of the children in the household by staying, if that makes sense.
Right. So we teach them to be self-sufficient and not to have to rely on anyone else, so they can get out into the world. Yeah. I mean, out into the world and be able to take care of their children by themselves.
That's why our housing program is so important, and all of them is because it really gives them a chance to, you know, be able to say, I don't I have a place to stay. I have a place to stay long-term, not just for a month or 45 days or 60 days which are the lengths of time at normal shelters that someone's allowed to stay. That's not enough time to get on your feet when you've got no vehicle, no job, no resources, no money, no way to rent anything. To rent an apartment, they require what you make 4 times what the rent is. How many women in that situation are going to be able to do that? So these resources that we have and these grants and these programs and the community giving and supporting and helping as much, in all these systems is just of such great importance. Everything from, food to shelter to clothing and anything that, they may need, vehicles, whatever, that they may need, because without those things and without that help, they do feel like they're stuck in that situation.
And also one more thing I want to say, that even though we are different entities of advocacy, the main purpose of the work that I know we all got into doing this is to support and provide advocacy for those that are in crisis. So even though we have so many different demographics and hats that we all wear, we have to remember that we're all on the same team, even though we're in different parts of the state and do different services for our clients. We have to know that we are doing this to support and provide advocacy for, less fortunate or victims of violent crime. So it's great that we have this support where I can call one agency and another agency, and that common focus is that victim and that survivor and that child or that family that has been through a crisis-related event, and that specifically being domestic violence.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our panelists a round of applause, please. My name is Don Thanars. I'm the president of the Pi Pi Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And on behalf of the brothers of the chapter, I want to thank all of you for coming out to be a part of this seminar. This is very important. About 4 months ago, some of us got an opportunity to actually sit in a seminar such as this, and many of us were shocked. We were shocked by what we heard, and we were on a college campus. There were representatives from Southern University and LSU, and we heard it. What was even more shocking, that there were incidents of domestic violence that was happening in the schools. In fact, in a few cases at the junior high or middle school level. So that's a lot of things that you heard tonight kind of reiterated those points, that domestic violence is real, and we need to be paying attention to it, and we need to see something, hear something, and we need to say something and make sure folks are getting the assistance that they need. I'd like to also thank all of you, first of all, for being here to be a part of this. And I want to thank my pastor for supporting us and allowing us to utilize, this facility and spend some of his personal time to make sure we could pull this event out. So thank you, Pastor. I want to thank the presenters. Thank all of you for coming out to be a part of this special occasion. Again, this is the first time we've done this, and I'm sure we'll do it again. And then lastly, I want to thank Brother Robin for putting this together. He's a new member of the fraternity. And we give them responsibilities, and they got to go out and kind of make things happen. So I want to thank him for stepping forward and making sure this happens. Just a little bit about Alpha Phi Alpha. Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, its mission is to develop leaders, promote brotherhood and academic excellence while providing service and advocacy for our community. That's who we are, and that's what we do. Pi Pi Lambda chapter has been around since November 1992. So we are the only chapter on the North Shore, and we basically support between the North Shore and Baton Rouge. There are no other alumni chapters, and there's one college chapter on the campus of Southeastern University. But we were chartered back in November of 1992, and since that time, we've been engaged and making a difference in this community. That's what we do. You probably have seen Alpha Phi Alpha out, picking up trash on the street. You may have seen us, cutting somebody's yard. Our colors are old, gold, and black. So when you see that, so we rely on you to help us help you. So we appreciate your support tonight, and we appreciate your continued support for any endeavor that you see Alpha Phi Alpha out in the community making a difference. And lastly, I want to make sure that you stop by the tables. We have a table out there so you can see some of the other activities that our chapter is involved with. But some of the presenters, they have tables and some pamphlets that we, to share with you. So make sure you stop by. They brought this out here for your benefit. So take it and share it. And again, I appreciate you and appreciate your support. Thank you.
I appreciate it again, Brother President. I just want to give a round of applause one more time for our presenters. Y'all did a great job. It's very informative. And I want to thank all you for coming tonight. I hope you were able to gain something from this. Before we leave for the evening, I want to touch on some of our upcoming events. On Saturday, April 22nd, we have our Fish Fry fundraiser. As Brother President told you all, I'm a new initiate of Popeye Lambda. I joined in spring 22, so I just made a year. One thing, if I didn't learn anything else while being in the chapter, is that they take their fish real serious. They take their fish real serious, like, they take it serious. So we ask that y'all come out and support us in that. Plates are $11 a plate. You can buy tickets from a brother and come pick it up. All the information is on the flyer outside. If you need a ticket, get with any brother. Me, preferably, because I didn't sell any of mine yet. So y'all get up with me after this. We also have our March for Babies, a Mother of a Movement walk. I'm actually going to get Brother Francis to come up here and talk about that, because he's the event chair for that event, and he can give y'all a better spiel than I can. Give me 1 second.
Yes, good evening, folks. Very quickly, Alpha Phi Alpha has had a partnership with the March of Dimes for over 40 years. We have done, one of our signature programs with March of Dimes has been Project Alpha, in which we talk to young men about sexual health. Well, another part of that, though, has been our involvement with March for Babies. And March for Babies, as we know, is something that the March of Dimes does, so that they advocate for women's health and the health of mothers and the health of families. So this Saturday, we're going to be participating in March for Babies. That's going to be in Lafreniere Park. However, here's where you come in. You can help us out by helping us raise funds and supporting the March of Dimes. And so the way you can do that, the easiest way you can do that, if you're on Facebook, you can go to our Facebook page. It is simply Pi Pi Lambda, P-I-P-I L-A-M-B-D-A, Pi Pi Lambda. If you search that Facebook page, we're going to come up, and you're going to see in the events that we do have March of Dimes. You can click the link right there, and you can make a donation. And so we would greatly appreciate your support there, but it's not just for this Saturday. It goes until June 30th. And just to let you know, we do have some friendly competition with other fraternities and sororities, and we need you to help us beat them. Okay? All right? It's very simple. But anyway, thank you so much for supporting us in any way that you do. And if you choose to support us for the March for Babies, then we will greatly appreciate that as well. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that, Brother Francis. And lastly, we have our Medicaid, Medicare, and Wellness Seminar coming up on Saturday, May 6th. That's basically just promote the knowledge of Medicaid, Medicare, and just living well. Okay, next slide, please. Maybe not. Oh, okay, there we go. All right, this wraps up our night, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all again. I want to thank our presenters. I want to thank the brothers that helped make this event possible. I'm sorry. Did y'all hear me just now? Okay. I want to thank all the brothers that made this event possible. When we thought of the idea to have this type of seminar, I took it on. So it wasn't because I'm a great public speaker, as y'all could tell. It wasn't for any other reason other than the fact that I'm very passionate about this specifically. Like I said, in my career path, throughout the jail, working on patrol, I have this learning about criminal justice. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in criminal justice. Learning about this, I know how prevalent it is in every household. If you aren't a victim or offender of domestic violence, you know someone. That's 100%. You know someone that's a victim of domestic violence and someone that you can help. And we all need to speak up, and we all need to get the ball rolling to help those people that need it. I was a victim of domestic violence. That's why I was very passionate about saying that men are also victims, and a lot of times men don't speak on it. We need to break that mold in our head that men can't be victims of domestic violence. You know, I see you in the back. As a man, it's very hard to speak and be vulnerable, especially around other men. So as third party people, we need to make ourselves available to those men that are willing to express themselves and not ridicule them or give them bad advice. We need to arm ourselves and be prepared to help the people that need help. Okay? So with that being said, again, I want to thank everybody for coming. Our presenters are going to hang around after we conclude for the night. In case y'all have any questions that y'all want to ask in private, they'll be available. There's not anything else. Thank y'all for coming.